Today we have yet another little study of the famous, well, not really famous, but small and somewhat insignificant looking Papyrus Berlin 11710. And I've been somewhat jokingly calling it the lost conversation between Jesus and Nathaniel. And in this video, we are going to do a source critical analysis of the saying, walk in the sun, which is what Jesus tells Nathaniel to do. In fact, that's this part of the text right here. Poreo en to helio, right? That's this part of the text right here, and we're going to take a quick little look at it. So let's go to the introduction. Walk in the sun. This is a lost saying of Jesus. We have taken a couple of looks at Papyrus Berlin 11710 in the past. It is a small 6th century piece of an apocryphal gospel. Now we're going to examine the saying of Jesus in this text and compare it to similar sayings in the Johannine writings, such as the Gospel and the epistles of John, because it's really looking like these are serving as the sources for the little tiny story that we get in this small fragment. So here's the Greek text of the saying. Kai epa rabiu kurie su e ho huios tu theou apokrythe auto ho rabis kai epa Nathaniel poreo in to helio. Or helio is really what that should be. So here is the English. And he, Nathaniel, said, Rabbi, Lord, you are the Son of God. And the rabbi answered him and said, Nathaniel, walk in the sun. And again, here's a zoomed in version of the part in the sun. You can see the eta here, the lambda here, and then you have, I guess, the iota kind of stuck over there, and then the omega got all messed up. Or might have just misspelled it as an omicron. But in any case, I'm trusting the transcriber on that one. Alright, so that's what we have. This short gospel papyrus seems to be an expansion of Jesus' conversation with Nathaniel as it appears in John 1, because Nathaniel says some of the same things in this text that he says with in the fourth gospel. And also, Nathaniel really is only a character that actually really does anything in John's gospel anyway. So that's how we know that this must be some kind of expansion on the story of Jesus' calling him as a disciple. Only a few sentences survive, and if you want the full treatment of all those fragments, you can go check out my other videos about this text on the channel. But these probably came from a longer span of text originally. What we have that survives is undoubtedly much smaller than what was originally there. But our concern here is with this imperative statement, walk in the sun. It's Jesus' command to Nathaniel. So are there any other sayings by Jesus that are like this? Well, it turns out that there are actually a couple. There are two places in particular that have similar wording or themes. We have John's Gospel, chapter 12, verse 35, and we have the first epistle of John, chapter 1, verse 7. So in a previous video, we already talked about the relationship between this papyrus and John chapter 1, but now we will examine the saying embedded within the papyrus text by comparing it to the passages that I just listed above. So now let's go through them one at a time. So let's start with the Gospel of John 12:35. And remember that the Berlin Papyrus says this, walk in the sun. So here's what we have. We have this portion that is relevant to us here, and it says, peripatete hos tophos eketa. And this just means, walk while you have the light. Jesus is saying, walk while you have the light. So the Berlin Papyrus says, walk in the sun. This says, walk while you have the light. So they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So that's important. So let's go to our next source. We have the first epistle of John, chapter 1:7. And remember, the Berlin Papyrus says, walk in the sun. What we have here in the Johannine epistle is, en to photi peripatomen. This is closer to what we want. But if we walk in the light, okay, so the light, that's about the same idea as the sun. You walk in the sun. If you do that, then you're walking in the light. This is not framed as an imperative. This is just framed as a first person plural verb. So we'll just have to keep that in mind. But it could be that this text is drawing from a similar stream of tradition, or this source could just be taking the reference to walking in the light and then turning it into a command on the lips of Jesus. We'll have to go through our different hypotheses and see which one that we think is correct. Okay, so what are the possible hypotheses? We have the papyrus, the Berlin Papyrus, that has a story of Nathaniel and Jesus that we find in John 1. And then we have a statement about walking in the light that is similar to a passage in John 12 and similar to a passage in 1 John 1. Sorry if that's very confusing. I tried to keep it clear. But in any case, what is the relationship among these texts? Well, there are 4 options as far as I can tell. We have the first option, which is that this source did not use the gospel and it did not use the epistle. It got its information from somewhere else. The second option is that the source used the epistle, but not the gospel. So he would have used 1 John, but not the Gospel of John. Then the third option is that the source could have used the gospel, but not the epistle. And then the final option is that the source used both the gospel and the epistle. So which is it? Well, let's see what we think. So here's the choice that I make, and you can obviously argue against me if you want to, but what it looks like to me is the following. The author of the source that's attested by the Berlin Papyrus used both the gospel and the epistle, and here are the reasons why. So option 1 fails, which is the view for independence. This fails because the verbal agreements are too great. And if you've seen my other videos about this text, you'll know that in some places the verbal agreement is about 80% between passages in John 1 and in this small fragment. So it seems like the texts are too close to be independent of each other. So option 2, which is the idea that it used the epistle only, fails because the epistle does not have the story of Nathaniel. It's John chapter 1 that has the story of Nathaniel. 1 John doesn't mention Nathaniel at all, and yet the Berlin Papyrus mentions Nathaniel talking with Jesus in the same way and saying some of the same things that happen in John chapter 1. So it really seems like this source, the source behind this papyrus, actually used John's gospel. But then option 3, which is to say that it used the gospel only, fails because the epistle matches the saying of the Berlin Papyrus better. Remember, what does the Berlin Papyrus say? It says, walk in the sun. Now, we saw John 12, where it just says something like, if I can remember, walk while you have the light. It's still an imperative, but it is not in a similar form. It's to walk while you have the light, not walk in the light. However, in 1 John chapter 1, we have a statement, if we walk in the light. So which one is closer? It's the second one, I think. Even though it's not an imperative, it still has the idea of walking in the light, which is very similar to walking in the sun. So that's the judgment I make. You have information that is from 1 John, and you have information that is from the Gospel of John. So that means I would say that both of those texts influence the Berlin Papyrus. So to make it easier to understand, here is how I would track the sources. We have the source that's Jesus' calling of Nathaniel. This is in John chapter 1. This is in the Gospel of John. Then we have the saying to walk in the light, which is from 1 John. Originally, this is not a saying of Jesus. This is something that the writer of this epistle is making. But then along comes the person who has the source that informed the papyrus that we have. This person took this saying, put it on the lips of Jesus, made it a saying of Jesus, and then put it in a similar story to the calling of Nathaniel. And then we have a sort of a midrash of Johannine sayings that are put on the lips of Jesus. And that's how I think that we got the source that is behind the Berlin Papyrus. So the text of the Berlin Papyrus would have been dated to around the 6th century, so the 500s CE. And we know that John was already popular by the mid-2nd century. So by the 150 CE, it was being used. So I'm guessing that this must have happened somewhere between maybe 200 CE and probably by 400 CE. That's not a very specific range. I know that's at least a gap of 200 years, but it's about the best that I can come up with. So that's my guess for the date and where the information came from. And anyway, these are my sources, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I welcome your comments. I really love source criticism. It's one of my favorite things to do in studying ancient canonical and non-canonical gospel materials. So I'm happy to interact with you on that at any time, and I will see you next time.